Hi, I'm taking a bit of a break from recording classes for the next few weeks. So in the meantime, I will republish some of the older ones that I think you will enjoy and find interesting. For today's class, we will explore how we can learn about the public presence of women in a given society by examining how various commentators understood the story of Dina. We'll witness a difference between Ashkenaz and Sefard, expressed both in biblical commentary as well as in halachic norms. So we're going to begin tonight by looking at 7 of the Rishonim, all of whom lived during the 12th and 14th centuries, commenting on the story of Dina, on the opening pasuk of the story of Dina. You know, in this week's parsha, we learned about Dina, that Dina went out, and as a result, she was raped by Shechem ben Chamoir, and the entire story is reported in the Torah. We're going to learn it in the Chitas on Thursday. As we're going to read these 7 commentators, we're going to find that there's going to be a common theme that runs through all 7 of them. And I'll tell you before we start reading what the common theme is going to be. The common theme is going to be, and it's okay if it makes you feel uncomfortable, the common theme we're going to find is a dissatisfaction and a discomfort with the idea of the woman leaving the home. In other words, what they're going to find a problem in this story of Dina is the Vateitze Dina, the fact that she left home in and of itself was problematic. So let's read these 7 sources and see the way they express them. We're going to begin with the Rambam's son. The Rambam had one son. His name was Reb Avram, and he wrote a commentary to the Torah. Interestingly, this commentary was unknown for many, many years, and it wasn't studied widely after his passing, and it was not printed when books started first being printed for a very long time. There is a non-Jew whose name was Robert Huntington, who in the 1600s went from England to Syria on some sort of mission for the church. And when he was there, he became very interested in old manuscripts that were in the Jewish community of Aleppo. It turns out that he brought back with him, and today this is all in the Bodleian Library in Oxford, he brought back with him many different manuscripts that he purchased over there. So for example, we're all familiar with the Rambam's drawing of the menorah. How do we have the Rambam's drawing of the menorah? We have it because it's in the Rambam's commentary to the Mishnah, and the original autograph copy of the Rambam's commentary to the Mishnah was in Syria. Why was it in Syria? The theory goes that the Rambam had a great-grandson, a few generations down, where they left Egypt, where they were living, and they moved to Syria. Likewise, in the previous class, we once spoke about that there's a Sefer Madan Ava of Mishnah Torah, and in this Madan Ava Mishnah Torah, though it wasn't handwritten by the Rambam, it was handwritten by a scribe, but Rambam put his signature on it and said that this was edited against my master copy. This too was in Aleppo, part of this collection, and Huntington bought these manuscripts, and he brought it back with him, and they survived, probably because of him, in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. So one of the Kisvei Yad that Huntington bought was also a Ksav Yad that turned out, I don't know if he knew then, but it turns out that it's a commentary written by the Rambam's son on the Torah. It was printed for the first time in 1958. Let's see what he has to say on the pasuk of Vateitze Dina. So he says as follows: Haidas HaMikra. The reason that the Torah says she bas Leah asher yolda leYaakov. Why does it say in the Torah that she is the daughter of Leah? In other words, why are we giving her the lineage over here? Everyone knows who Dina is. We know who her mother is. We know who her father is. Why are we referencing her mother and her father? All of the Mefarshim have this question. So he says, it's l'rameis, it's to tell you, shenisrashlu bishmi rasa, because they neglected to guard her properly. Hisrashlus bilti mas'ima. It was just inappropriate the way they kind of weren't guarding her, weren't protecting her. V'yatza min ha'israshlos mashayatza mimena. And because of the fact that they kind of weren't guarding her, that's why this happened. Uvazem musar labali Torah, and therefore it's a lesson for any person who has Torah ethics. Shalo yisrashlu b'shmiras hanashim. You really need to guard and watch and make sure the women are protected. What does he mean here when he says, make sure the women are protected? So we think we know what he means. The idea is that women shouldn't be going out, and if they are going out, they should be protected with a male companion, etc., etc. Number two, you go and, so what's his point here? So that's why it says her parents, why is it mentioning her parents to say that they didn't do a good job? They should have been watching her. That's why it mentions Leah, and that's why it mentions Yaakov. Next up, the Ibn Ezra, who lived earlier. The Avram ben Arambam is writing in Egypt sometime in the 1200s, we assume. Ibn Ezra is writing in the 1000s, maybe the 1100s. The Ibn Ezra writes as follows, one word, Vateitze Dina me'atzma, on her own. She went out on her own. It's hard to know exactly what it means, but he seems to be saying that she went out on her own, without permission, without authority, by herself, and that in and of itself was a problem. Next, number three, Rabbi Yaakov ben Abba Mari Anatoli. Not a very well-known rabbi. He lives, what are his dates? His 1194 to 1256. Although he never met the Rambam, he was a student in thought of the Rambam, very much a philosopher, and he wrote a sefer called Malmud HaTalmidim. A Malmud is, in the Lashon of the Mishnah, a Malmud means a goad. It's the stick that the shepherd carries to guide the animal to make sure it stays in the proper path. So he called his sefer Malmud HaTalmidim, like this sefer is going to keep you in line, is going to keep you straight. And it goes through all of the Torah, and it's like in a Rambam style, giving an allegorical meaning to many of the different interpretations of the Torah. He was related, but through marriage, to the famous family of the Ibn Tibbins. This is the family that translated the Rambam's works from Arabic into Lashon HaKodesh, who lived in Provence, so he married into that family. Look what he says. Sipur Dina v'hanimshach eleha, the story of Dina, lamed chadvarim toivim, it teaches you important things. Tchila lamad lecha, the first thing it teaches you, kitseis hapsulois ana va'ana, that when the young girls are going out this way and that way, yaveh hamichsha lifneim, it causes problems. So he's number three that fits this theme. Number four, Rabbeinu Bechaya. Rabbeinu Bechaya and the next three rabbis that we're going to look at are all Talmidim of the Rashba. They all lived pretty much, they ended their lives in the mid-1300s in Spain. Rabbeinu Bechaya is probably the most famous of the next three. He's the one who wrote a famous commentary on the Torah. Look what he writes. The story of Vateitze Dina, so he writes as follows. The Torah is not happy when a woman is going out. Rather, when she is discreet and modest at home, then then the Torah praises it. And here he invokes the pasuk, Kol kvuda bas melech penima, the honor of the daughter of the king is inward. And then he quotes the pasuk about Sarah. Where was Sarah when the malachim came? Hine ba'oil, she's in the tent. Same idea. And therefore he concludes, Ha'isha atznuya ruya leishev b'yarchasei habayis, the woman should be in the home, it's not at the door of the home, so that she shouldn't be seen by passerby. Next, Rabbi Yaakov Sekili, not so well known. He writes in the Akdama of his sefer. His sefer is called Teiras HaMincha. Why is it called Teiras HaMincha? Because he says that he was asked to give drashas in Shul in Spain in the mid-1300s. He was asked to give drashas every Shabbos during Mincha time. So then he wrote down his drashas and he called it Teiras HaMincha. And in the Sefer, we have the date that he wrote it in the year 1337, but it was, again, only printed for the first time in Tafshin on Aleph in 1991, the first time it was printed. What does he write there? V'chein Dina, about Dina. She did something wrong. What did she do wrong? She went to take a walk, to check out the girls of the land, and therefore this evil happened on her. Now, I don't believe this rabbi or any of the other rabbis are trying to say that therefore what Shechem did was justified. In fact, all of them know the continuation of the Torah. The continuation of the Psukim of the Torah are very clear that the entire city was wiped out and punished because of the rapes. In other words, the rape is not justified. But they are comfortable having that truth in their head at once, and then at the same time pointing fingers, and in this case pointing fingers to who? To Dina. And why? Just for the very fact that she left her home. Number 6, Rabbi Yeshua ibn Shuib. He too, like Rabbi Yaakov Sakili and like Rabbeinu Bechaya, lived in the same time, and also was a student of the Rashba. He also gave drushes, and he these on Parshas Vayishlach, he writes as follows: the woman should be modest; she shouldn't go out, as it says, the fact that she went out caused the whole story. And now, the final of the 7 sources is the Ralbag. Ralbag is Reb Levi ben Gershom, and Reb Levi ben Gershom is living at the same time period as all the other rabbis that we're talking about, more or less, and he's known more as a philosopher. He wrote a lot of works on Jewish philosophy and astronomy, even I think I read that there's a crater on the moon that's named after him because he was a chashuva astronomer that's recognized even today. He also wrote a commentary on the Torah. What's interesting about his commentary is, I guess he was dealing with the problem, why are all these stories necessary? Why are they relevant? And so, besides for the commentary at the end of each section, however he defines a section, he has what's called the toyeliyos. The toyeliyos are the benefits. What are the benefits of studying this? And he'll list sometimes 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, many lessons that a person could learn. So one of the toyeliyos that he has in Parshas Vayishlach, hatoyeles haravi, the 4th one, shein roi leisha sheteitza mebeis, a woman shouldn't go out of the home. Haloisira mashakara ledina, look what happened to Dina, but seisa lirois bibnois haaretz, when she went out. Ache kemat hayazeh siba lahashmin kol beis avia, her whole father's house was in jeopardy because of the war that happened over here, right? Lulia Hashem shahayolem. Remember what happened when the brothers kill out Shechem? Yaakov says that we're in danger. So all of this negativity all resulted from the story of Dina's going out. So here we have a very strong common denominator between all 7 of these sources. They're just dissatisfied. They're not happy. They're not comfortable with the idea of women generally leaving the home. Now, what's another common denominator between all 7 of these sources? So you may have noticed that all 7 of these sources are Sefard related. So Rabbi Avram ben Arambam, he comes from Sefard and then moves to another Islamic country, to Egypt. Ibn Ezra he moved around a lot in life, but his roots are in Sefard. Rabbi Yaakov ben Abba, Mari Anatoli, and Reb Levi ben Gershom are from Provence. So let's talk for a moment about Provence, because I need to make the case to you that Provence and Sefard are very much related. Sometime in the, Spain, during this period of time when Spain was under the rule of Muslims, there was a time when the Almohads took over. And this is the famous time when the Rambam leaves. Why does the Rambam leave? Oh, because they were such fanatics and they didn't let Jews practice their Yiddishkeit. Where did the Rambam run? He went south. He went to Morocco, and from there he's made his way to Eretz Yisrael and then to Mitzrayim. Just like some Jews left Spain and went into North Africa as a way of running away from Spain. This is in the 12th century. There were some Jews that went north. They went to Provence, this area in southern France, and they camped out there. And so there were many Sephardic families that moved there. This includes Reb Levi ben Gershom. This includes Reb Yaakov ben Abba Mari. And therefore, in many ways, not in all, but in many ways, the influence of Sephardi was very strong in there, in terms of secular studies and in terms of many other aspects as well. And so therefore, for these 2 rabbis, we can also talk about Sephardi influence. Rabbeinu Bechaya, Rabbi Yaakov Sekili, and Reb Shua ibn Shuib, all 3 of them are the Talmud of the Rashba. They're also from Sephardi. Okay, so that's interesting. All 7 of these sources are what we would call Sephardi sources. Okay, very well. But now we have to open up the Svarim and let's look at the same time period at the Ashkenazi commentators on the Torah. What are we talking about when we say the Ashkenazi commentators on the Torah? So Rashi, Rashbam, Chizkuni, Daskenim Abalei HaTosfos, Hadar Skenim, and a few others. And what we find is as follows. Number 1, some of them don't talk at all about this issue. Some of them do, but they only quote Midrashim. And now I need to highlight for you, all 7 of these quotes that we learned was not rabbis quoting Midrashim. They were using their own words. They were writing their own message in their own language. And we don't find, and I was not able to find any of that in any of the classic commentators that were living in Ashkenaz at the time. We don't find anything of this sort. We do find them bringing some Midrashim, and we'll see that soon, but using their own language and talking about this value, we don't see that. So that's an interesting thing that we're going to need to explore. Now, if you go a little further, the truth is, if you go back to the zone of Medrash, which comes before these Rishonim, you'll notice that in Medrash there's also 2 voices. There's also 2 voices on this issue. The first voice that we're going to see is the Medrash Tanchuma. And the Medrash Tanchuma's voice is very similar to the Sephardic Rishonim. Why? Because you're going to see that the Medrash Tanchuma is consistent. When he talks about this, he has a problem with women leaving the home in and of itself. So let's see the examples. So here's a Medrash Tanchuma, Parshas Vayishlach, where it says as follows: Amar Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani, Tzricha isha liyos yesheves b'tzayich habayis v'loiseitze l'orchayv. A woman should stay home. She shouldn't go to the street. Shaloi tekashal atzma, which would cause problems for herself. V'loisavi mishal livnei adam. She shouldn't cause problems for men. V'nimsu mistaklim be'ishes ish, because they're then going to be gazing upon a married woman. That's one teaching. Next teaching: Amar Rab Yehuda bar Shalom. Teidlacha, you should know the evidence for this. Sharei Dina bas Yaakov. Dina b'shvil shaisa regila padranis, because she, padranis is a interesting word, to go out and to walk around. Therefore, garma takalala atzma. She caused this problem for herself. What do you see in these teachings? In and of itself, outwardness is a problem. Another Medrash Tanchuma, this one in Vayishlach Vav, says as follows: Vateitzei Dina bas Leah. That's no good. We don't want Vateitzei Dina. We want it to be Kokfuda bas Melech Prima. This is what this Tanchuma says. The next Tanchuma, Vayishlach Zayin. Vateitzei Dina bas Leah, v'loi bas Yaakov. Why is it called bas Leah? Why is she not called bas Yaakov? Zok the Medrash, Tla Akosov Be'ima, the Torah is linking her to a mother. Ma Leah yoitz anis, just like Leah went out. Avzu yoitz anis, so too Dina went out. Uminayin, where do we see that Leah went out? In the story when the story of the Dudaim, Leah goes out toward Yaakov and greets him in the field. So we see that Leah went out. Continues the Medrash and says, Lirois, she went to look. But you know something? You could read that word, if you change the nekudos, lirois, you could change it, leirois, to be seen. Says that, and the Medrash now almost is like talking to Dina. Bekashta lirois, you wanted to see. But guess what? Vinira, you were seen. Shenamar vayar oiso shchem ben chamor. In other words, what's the thrust of this Medrash? Going out is a problem, number one, and being seen is a problem. Yeah, you went to see, but the very fact that you were seen is a problem. So this voice of the Tanchuma fits very much with the voice that we saw from all of those Sefard and Provence Rishonim. However, when we look at the Bereishis Rabah, in some ways, what we're going to see now is a little more shocking. But on the other hand, I'm also going to show you that even though the material here is a little more shocking, but it also offers a different perspective on this question of, is a woman leaving the home okay? So these are two different collections of Midrashim. It's hard to sometimes know when exactly, where exactly, and in what the dates for each one of these Midrashim. That's like a very complicated subject that we're going to have to leave for another time. Says Bereishis Rabah as follows. There's a pasuk in Yecheskel that it's a condemnation of Am Yisrael. And basically, it's saying that Kol HaMoshel Alayich, all the people who are going to give a mashal, who are going to want to say about the suffering of the Jews and the sins of the Jews, Yimshal Lamer, they're going to say the following mashal. What are they going to say? Ki ima bita. The mother and the daughter are the same. The daughter is similar to the mother. What was the Navi trying to say? Who's the mother? Canaan. The Canaanim are the mother. They came before us. And the Yidden were the daughter. It's almost as if they gave birth to us. We came after. So ki ima bita, you're doing Avodah Zarah, they did Avodah Zarah. So that's what the Moshlim are going to say. Oh, you think you're a new generation. The new generation comes forward. Yeah, we have new ideas. We're going to be better. And then we end up exactly like our parents, right? So Ki'ima Bita is what it's saying over here, that the people who are experts at saying these Mishalim, they're going to say that Am Yisrael is exactly like the predecessors of the Canaan. Okay, now in that pasuk, we have a very long, interesting teaching. We're only going to do a little bit of it. So there is a rabbi by the name of Yosi Me'oina'a, that's probably a place, and Tirgame, he explains this pasuk as follows. Leis torta, you don't have a cow, a gisha, that's goring, ad de barta be'ita. Barta is this daughter, and be'ita is another form of goring. In other words, we shouldn't expect from a cow anything else than that its daughter will also be a goring cow. Let me say that again. We shouldn't expect from a goring mother cow anything but that her daughter should be a similarly goring cow. And then he continued and said, Leis itza zanya, a woman, in terms of prostitution, same thing. Don't expect anything else from a woman prostitute, ad the barta zanya, that anything other than her daughter being a prostitute too. Basically, the children follow the role of their parents. Now look at the shocking thing that the rabbis tell Yosi Me'oina. They say, and that's, by the way, the lashon of the pasuk, Ki'ima Bita, the daughter is similar to the mother. So Amruleh, they said, Im Kain Leo Imenu Zoina Haisa? Are you saying that Leo Imenu is a Zoina? Now what's embedded into this question? It's what's so obvious is that Dina is acting like a Zoina. But a daughter could only be like a mother. So if a daughter can only be like a mother, if you're right that a daughter always reflects a mother, so we all know Dina is a Zoina. So now you're telling us that it had to be Leah too. Do you really want to say that? Amar Lahem, he said yes. Indeed, Leah went out. And how did she go out? Yatzas mikushatas kezoina. She went adorned as if she were chas v'shalom a zoina. Lefichach v'ateitzei Dina bas Leah. And that's why her daughter went out. Okay, this is a shocking medrash. It's a shocking medrash in the way it's speaking about Dina. It's a shocking medrash in the way it's speaking about Leah. Because it's making an argument and saying that they did something inappropriate. But I need you to also realize something else. What was inappropriate? Not the etzem yetzia. The etzem going out, this medrash doesn't have a problem with. In fact, in order to have a problem, it had to say that something else went on. That the way they went out was inappropriate because those mikushetas kezoina somehow dressed inappropriately, however we're going to understand that. The idea of exiting in and of itself doesn't seem to bother this medrash. This is the Bereishis Rabah. Let's go to the next piece in Bereishis Rabah, and here we'll see both sides. So first, we'll see the first side. Rab Rechya b'shem Rab Levi Amar. Rab Rechya, in the name of Rab Levi, said. So le'echad, really, when the medrash does this, it means mashal le'echad is a mashal to a person. Shahaya biyadei litra echad shal basar. He had in his hand a measurement. This is a Roman measurement of a pound of meat, but it's concealed. V'kivin shagalaisa. But when he uncovered it, yarat ha'oif, the vulture came v'chatva menu and grabbed the meat from him. Kach v'ateisei Dina bas Leah. Dina went out miyad. So right away, what happened? She was exposed. Vayarois Shechem ben Chamor. This voice in the Medrash is similar to the Tanchuma voice. This voice in the Medrash is saying the very fact that it was uncovered, the very fact that she went out was in and of itself a problem. Now look what happens. Immediately another rabbi comes in and says, Reb Shmuel ben Nachman Amar, hold on a second, Shagila ba deroya, which the Mefarshim say, what this means is that Dina exposed her arm. So in other words, I know you just said a very nice mashal, the fact that the meat was uncovered, boom, someone came to take it. But hold on, let me explain. Something not modest happened. Something unusual happened. Not the going out in and of itself was the problem, but the fact that Dina did something inappropriate. So it's like, on the one hand, when you're reading these midrashim, you're like, I don't know, it sounds a little odd to speak about Dina and Leah as doing things that are inappropriate. Okay? Whereas in the Tanchuma, it didn't speak about that language of showing body parts and dressing up like a Zaina. You don't have that language. So, but on the other hand, Tanchuma is saying, I don't like women leaving. And two of the voices in the Bereishis Rabah, yes, there is another one, but at least two of the voices in the Bereishis Rabah, the only way they are willing to condemn Dina is if we say she did something unusual in terms of how she dressed. And so that's interesting in terms of seeing this tension already in the Midrashim, and I'm arguing that we see a similar tension by the Rishonim as well. That for the Sfardim, they are in sync with this Tanchuma, and they're embracing it, and they're lending their own language to it, which is very important. When you lend your own language to something, that means it's really your thing. The Ashkenazim barely quote from the Tanchuma. If they're quoting, it's from the Bereishis Rabah, okay? And almost never, using their own language and their own words and their own musar into this discussion. In fact, we have this interesting genre of later midrashim. And that is, there are midrashim that people wrote it under the title of medrash, but really it's commentaries from the Rishonim, but they're collections of midrashim. Meaning, one of the people living in the era of the Rishonim made a collection of teachings from the medrash. There's a nice sampling of these, and the common denominator of all of them that are relevant for this discussion is that they're not from Sefard. They're from Italy, they're from Ashkenaz, maybe from Greece, but they're not from Sefard. And we see that on the one hand, they need to quote these midrashim. That's their job. They summarize midrashim. And you'll see that they go out of their way to say that Dina acted inappropriately. And again, initially it's like, why are you doing that? But it could be what's happening over here is because to say that in and of itself there was an issue with Dina going out, that they didn't want to do that. To say there was no problem, lechatchila, they didn't want to do that either. To say everything's perfect and fine, they didn't want to do that. For some reason, there's this very strong tendency that something went wrong here, some wrong behavior happened. The only question is it wrong behavior of the etzem going out, or is it the wrong behavior of the way she went out? So let's look at two examples. The first example is from Reb Tuvia ben Eliezer. He has a medrash that's called Lekach Toiv. It's generally assumed that he lived sometime in the 1000s, either in Greece or in Ashkenaz. And his medrash is called Lekach Toiv. Sometimes it's called Psikta Zutrasa. And look what he writes. Lirois bivnoisa aretz. She went to see. Well, actually, not to see. Yatza laharois. It's doing this drasha. Lirois laharois. Now, when the Tanchuma did it, it just meant to say, you thought you're going to see. It ended up happening that you got seen. He's doing something else here. He's saying she went. Lirois bivnoisa aretz. No, Yatzas, the reason she went out was laharois yafya. That's similar to the Bereishis Rabah school. Mikushetas Kazaina, Gila's Raya. And here, she went out to show her beauty. Okay, so that was an issue. Another example, Reb Nachem ben Shloima. This is a medrash called Seichel Toiv. He's assumed to be from the 12th century and an Italian. And he writes as follows, Hatetzi Dina bas Leah, Yatzas Bita, meaning Leah's daughter went out, Mikushetas, adorned Lepritzus, in an immodest way. Verasa Kazaina, and she looked like a Kazaina. And why'd she go out? To show her beauty. So here we see in these non-Sephardic anthologies of midrashim, they're careful, it seems, to use this version of the Bereishis Rabah. And here I'll say, when you do have one of the Rishonim who brings from the midrashim and therefore is condemning Dina, it's in this sprach. It's in the sprach of the Bereishis Rabah. So in other words, to summarize the difference between the Rishonim in Sefard and Ashkenaz is in two ways. Ashkenaz use their own language. Rishonim and Sefard use their own language. The Rishonim and Ashkenaz did not. In this topic, as far as I can tell, I can't say I looked at every single source, but I looked at many. Number one. Number two, when the Rishonim do bring the midrashim, rather than bringing the midrashim that make it sound like in and of itself there was a problem going out, the midrashim that they bring is that Dina went out in an inappropriate way. Either she was overdressed in this way or underdressed in that way or whatever it is. Now, let's do this. I want to show you that really this difference, actually, you can see in halacha as well, in halachic sources too. I'm going to show you halachic sources from Sefard, and you're going to see it's going to match up very well with the Sephardi approach to this whole discussion. In other words, we're going to see in halacha a tendency for the Sephardim to be talking about women should not be going out. And then we'll look at contemporaneous sources from the same time in Ashkenaz, and we're going to see that they have a whole different approach to this. So mamish, the difference in how we're looking at Dina and how we're teaching Dina, it reflects itself in halacha as well. All right, there's a very famous passage of Rambam. Okay? And think about what the Rambam's son wrote that we opened the class with as we're reading this passage of Rambam, and it's Hilchos Ishus Perek Yud Gimel. So he starts off by saying that every woman has the right to go visit her father's house, can go to a house of mourning, can go to a wedding, to bestow kindness on her friends and relatives. After all, she wants them to reciprocate for her. And then he says the words, She'ena bebeis hasoyar, she's not in jail, she's not incarcerated, that she shouldn't be able to be immobile, that she shouldn't be able to move. However, then the Rambam continues and says what I think is a rather famous paragraph. Famous, infamous, however you want to say it. It says, Havol gnai hu leisha, it is very, very big gnai for a woman, Shatia yoitze tamid, pam b'chutz, pam b'rchovis, to be going out constantly to the streets. V'yesh labal limnoya ishtam, is a husband should hold his wife back from this. Remember what his son said. V'lo yani chen, Allah says, don't let her out, elakamay pam achas b'chodesh, once a month, oy pamayim b'chodesh, or twice a month. Kefi hatzoydach, in accordance with what is necessary. Why? She'en yofi leisha leleishe bizavis beis, a woman, she belongs in the corner of her home, and he quotes the pasuk, Kol kvuda bas melech pnim. Now I'll tell you an amazing thing. The Rabbi Yosef Karo, when he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, very often paraphrased the Rambam. And this whole thing he left out. It's fascinating. He left out this whole thing. What's interesting is, and by the way, the Torah quotes this word for word. So the Torah, the Rosh's son, Rabbi Yaakov Bala Turim, he quoted this word for word. The Mechaber, following the Torah, and he used the system and ignored the Torah and ignored the Rambam and didn't discuss this at all in Shulchan Aruch. Came along the Ramah and said, Epis fort darfman ya, something you need to have here. So the Ramah put in one line, not this whole once a month, 2 months, but the Ramah put in a line. You know, there's a value here, whatever. And in 3-4 words, the Ramah mentioned something briefly. Stam, that's an interesting thing. The Ramah, the Ashkenazi, came in to put to fix what the Mechaber left out. Why the Mechaber left it out is an interesting question. What do you see here? Here you see a strong value of tznius, the way it was understood then by the Rambam and applied then, was this idea. She's not going out. So if you have this Rambam in halacha talking about this value, would there be any surprise that his son would look at the story of Dina and say, yeah, what happened? Where were the men protecting that this shouldn't happen? It's like such an obvious link between the halacha here and the parshanut on Dina. Let's look at a tshuva of the Ritva. The Ritva is also from that same generation of those three rabbis, the students of the Rashba. He's mamish living in the same time in Spain. And look what he addresses the following question. You had a shaila where basically a husband and wife got into a dispute that needed to be brought in front of a beis din. And the woman is over here being sued. And so she wants to basically hire, in a halachic language, you would call it an apotropos. But in our language, you would want to hire a lawyer. That she shouldn't have to come to court. And if she would have a lawyer who would represent her interests in court in the case against her husband. The details of this case, we do not know. So the question was, is this okay? So turn the page. Look at the top of number 3. Of the page number 3. Tshuva, here's the answer. Da, says the Ritva, ki bedin nitpa, in the case of someone who's being sued, nechlaku ar-rishonim zal im mimana and netlar im lahav. There's a dispute amongst the Rishonim. If you're sued in court, are you allowed to hire a lawyer? It uses here the word and netlar. This is a word that the Talmud Yerushalmi uses. The background is bekitzer as follows. A kohen gadol is not, it's discussing over there the kohen gadol who could be sued in court. So the Gemara says, but for his honor, why don't we let him have a netlar? And it uses that word. It's a Greek word, and it means a representative or something like that. So the Yerushalmi wants to know, for the kohen gadol's dignity, let him have a netlar, which makes it sound. The Gemara's answer is, yeah, but you could do that for the tainus. You could do that for the back and forth. But for the shvuah, the oath, you can't have the lawyer take the oath. That's what the Gemara there says. So it sounds like a lawyer is okay, at least for the defendant, that a lawyer is okay. But this turned into a major machlokes of Rishonim. Why? Some people said, no, normally a lawyer is not okay. We want the regular balei din in court. A kohen gadol, there was an exception for him. So that's a machlokes from the Rishonim. And by the way, this gets into a whole other topic, a fascinating topic, is this, does halacha like lawyers? Does you have it in Batei Din where you have a toyin? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? People have very strong opinions about this. It's a fascinating discussion. And this Gemara, this Yerushalmi, is central to that discussion. So the Ritva is here summarizing, saying, look, it's a dispute. Some people think a defendant could hire a lawyer. Some people think a defendant can't. Now look what he says. Let me tell you, the whole debate is ella kishan nitba ish, if the defendant is a man. If we're dealing with a modest woman, who doesn't go out in front in the presence of self-respecting men, then everyone agrees that she could hire a lawyer. The mikra male dibarakasav, because we have the pasuk of kol kvuda bas melech penima. So in other words, there's this real thing of women who don't go out, and this is a reality that he's talking about. That's a real reality, and so much so that even a view that usually doesn't allow a lawyer is going to bend over to say, you know something, but I have this value of kol kvuda bas melech penima, so I'm going to say that women are going to be the exception to the rule, and they're going to have the lawyer. He then goes on in the next paragraph to say, what if the husband is afraid that the lawyer is trying to create a wedge between them? Her lawyer may have an interest for some reason that they should be in a bigger dispute, a bigger fight, and maybe separate and divorce. So he writes over there that what the court does is they send a shliach, a beis din, to the house. They listen to what she's saying. They make sure, that's what the lawyer said in court. It's in sync. And then we know that we can rely on the lawyer, and we're happy, and that's how we deal with it. So now there are other sources who disagreed with the fact that she could hire a lawyer with the Ritva. But what do they say? They say, just send the shliach beis din to the house and get an affidavit and take testimony because of kol kvuda bas melech penima. So what's interesting about the Ritva is that he's willing to, so to speak, bend the halacha in order to preserve this value. But at the end of the day, other Rishonim in Sefard, I failed to say, in Sefard, meaning the Rimi Gash and the people who lived in the prior generations in Sefard, this is something that they recognize as an important thing and as a reality in their day. Put it together with the Rambam, put it together with those Sephardi sources and how they see Dina, a clear picture emerges. On the other hand, let's go to the Ashkenazi sources, and here we're going to see some interesting things. So we're going to begin here with the Ra'avan. Ra'avan is Rabbi Eliezer ben Nosson. His dates are usually given as 1090 to 1170. It's roughly Rabbeinu Tam's dates. So he says as follows. Nishalti, I was asked a question, a case of Ruvain Shetav. It's obviously all these are John Does. Shatava Eshes Shimon Lidin, who sued the wife of Shimon, Al Pikadon Shehifki Biyada, because he had a deposit. He left a deposit with her, right? Let's say he borrowed money from her, and he left a deposit with her, and a collateral, and now there's some dispute about the collateral, or it could be some other case. The bottom line is he claims he has property that Shimon's wife has. Okay, now Shimon comes, he's a smart guy, and he comes with a whole bunch of arguments of why his wife shouldn't be able to be sued, and the whole case should be dropped and thrown out of court. And it's actually complicated because he says 2 or 3 different arguments, which it's not really relevant. One of the arguments that he says is there's a Talmudic source for this idea that a man doesn't want his wife to be undergo the disparaging situation in Beis Din. What's the lashon? Ein adam roitze shetisbaz ishtoi bebezin. What's the context here? It's actually a machloikis. It has to do with nedarim. You know, a neder, you need to come in front of a rabbi, you need to say, had I known that it would have had these implications, I never would have made this neder or not. So without getting into all the details, the question is a man comfortable with his wife going through that process in Beis Din? So Rabbi Eliezer says, no, a man is not comfortable with his wife going through that process in Beis Din. Rameir says, yes, a man is comfortable with his wife going through that process in Beis Din. So this guy, Shimon, whose wife is the defendant here, said, like Rabbi Eliezer, I don't want my wife to undergo that process of the neder and Beis Din, so therefore you got to drop the whole case, and I don't want this. So what did Ravan say? Ravan says, first of all, who said Rabbi Eliezer is right? Maybe Reb Meir is right, and the halacha is that there's absolutely no problem to go and men aren't, so to speak, bothered by this. Then he went on to say another thing. And even if you're going to tell me that Rabbi Eliezer is right, when is Rabbi Eliezer right? By Nedarim. Why Nedarim? Because the Rav has to ask questions and get into details, and it could be private. So that the man doesn't want that his wife should go to Beis Din and they get into the private affairs of the house. That's where he doesn't want it. But here, what is it? Here's a regular shvuah about you owe me money, you don't owe me money, I'm sorry. There's no reason why she shouldn't have to go to Beis Din in order to make this shvuah. And then comes the important paragraph that we're going to learn together on the left column. Chol shekein bizman hazeh. This is true. The idea that the woman should be forced into court in order to give a shvuah is true in our day. In our day meaning in the 1100s. Why? Because what's the reality in our day? Shahanashim apitroipes. The women are the apitroipes, meaning they're the ones who are custodians. They are, if you want to say, they're agents, business agents. V'chanuniyos. They run shops. V'nois ois, v'nois nois. That's masa o matan. They engage in commerce, in business. They're giving and taking, buying and selling. The loivois umalvois. They borrow and lend. Remember, money lending is a big business for Jews at this time. Upoirois v'nifrois. They collect payment and they make payment. V'nifkadois umafkidois. They give collateral and they're taking collateral. So he makes this whole list that really portrays women as being very integrated into the economy in the 1100s in where he's living in Ashkenaz on the Rhineland, in the Rhineland. If you're going to come and tell me that women don't have to swear for their business matters, you're not going to let anyone remain alive. What does that mean? People are going to stop doing business with them. I cannot do business with a woman because she's going to be too much of a financial risk, because she always could say, I'm not coming to court and I'm not going to do a shvuah. Says the Ravan, so therefore, we know that Chachamim sometimes did an economic intervention and changed something in order that the economy should flourish. So there's takanas hashuk, lases takana shalo yimnu, that they should not refrain from a shvuah, even if al pi din. He doesn't think al pi din they have a way out. But even if al pi din there was an excuse that a woman wouldn't have to show up for the shvuah, we should say that we're going to make a takanas hashuk and say they have to come to show up for the shvuah. As we find in numerous places, the chashu chachamim letakanas hashuk, where we see the chachamim wanted the marketplace to work efficiently, and if something's getting in the way, they dealt with it, and that would be something getting in the way. What would be something getting in the way? If you had a situation in where a significant percentage of daily life would be impeded because now men can't trust what's going on because they don't have the tool of shvuah, which was a huge tool in the Middle Ages to ensure honesty. Even if it were right, which it's not, he says, but even if it were right, that she cannot be obligated a shvuah. Nonetheless, mishum takanas hashuk havalashbia, we should be giving her a shvuah. This is a very different picture. Here you're seeing a picture of, there's no way you can do all of these activities while you're remaining at home. This is, it's obviously portraying a very different reality. A reality, could you imagine a biblical commentator living during that century and saying, oh yeah, Vateitzei Dina, the very fact that she went out was problematic. All of a sudden you start seeing why it just wouldn't make sense. There's another expression of this that comes out in the din of Yichud. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah and Daf Chav Gimel says that a woman, a Jewish woman, should not have Yichud with a non-Jew. Now the truth is, that sounds a little odd because a Jewish woman should not have Yichud with a Jew as well. So the Gemara clarifies. With a Jew, if a Jew's wife is together with him, then there isn't a problem for Yichud with another woman. Why? Because the man is together with his own wife, so we assume that everything is going to be okay. When, however, it's a non-Jew, Yichud is asur even if he's with his wife. Why? Because things could happen even if his wife is there. Okay, that's the din. And the Gemara assumes on Daf Chav Gimel that if a woman violated that rule, then we have to assume the worst actually happened. That what? That she was raped. Now, if you're assuming that, there's an implication. What's the implication? The implication is that if a woman married to a Kohen had Yichud with a non-Jew, then the Gemara is assuming afilu, the lashon of the Gemara is afilu di'avanami. Even if she did it, even if it's already in the past, nonetheless we have to suspect that an actual rape happened with the non-Jew. That's how serious this issur is, even though he was with his wife, the non-Jew was. Okay, so now Tosfos is like, oh, that's a big problem. Why is that a big problem? Well, before we get to Tosfos, let's go to Sefard. If you say in Spain, and you're in a place where B'chlal, women aren't going out of the house, what's the problem? So you have a din. What's the din say? The din says that if a woman had Yichud with a non-Jew, even if the non-Jew's wife is there, so then we assume the worst happened. Okay, when does that happen? How does that happen? If women aren't going out, how often does such a thing happen? It could happen, we understand, but it's not, it doesn't raise any question, doesn't raise any problems. But for an Ashkenazi, that assumption in the Gemara right now raises a huge problem. And look at the way Tosfos asks the question. Tema, I'm bewildered. Im Cain, if this is right, lo yinachta bas la'Avram Avinu, you do not let any Jewish woman, a daughter of Avram, Eishes Kohen, the wife of a Kohen, Yeshavas Tachas Bailo. No Kohen could remain married to his wife. Look at Tosfos' statement. No Kohen could be married to his wife. Why? Because every Kohen's wife is having Yichud with a non-Jew. Why is every Kohen's wife having Yichud with a non-Jew? Oh, because if you know the Ra'avan, and you saw that what was going on over there, the way they're integrated in the economy, that's why. After it is impossible, Tosfos says, you're going to tell me that even for a 5-minute thing, the Yichud is a problem. And if you just told me lichatchila, it's a problem, okay, so we try to avoid it. And if it happens, but lichatchila, we try to avoid it. But you're telling me that even b'di'evet, if it happens, she's asur l'baila. So basically tell every wife that's married to a kohen that she's asur l'baila. Because in the reality that they're living in, that's what it is. What does Tosfos go on to say? Nah, that's not really what the Gemara means. He goes on to say, it's only a real problem if she's a captive. If she's a captive, the non-Jew is in control, then we're taka worried with a Eishes Kohen that she was raped, and there's taka issur for her to return to her husband, because when he's in control over her, and he's, so to speak, has her in his control, then we could worry that a rape happened. But in a regular business setting, where in the language that he says, she could yell out and she could be saved, so then we assume that he's scared, and we're not going to asur. It doesn't mean it's mutar l'chatchila. It's not mutar l'chatchila, but we're not going to asur this type of yichud. Here you see language again, where he's basically saying, that is basically reflecting this idea, that a vateitzei Dina, to say vateitzei Dina means that in and of itself, leaving the home is problematic, just doesn't seem to really fly so well in Ashkenaz. Now in that light, I want to introduce you or reintroduce you a very interesting woman who lived during this period in time, and she's actually a Kedosha because she was killed. Her name was Dolza, and her husband's name is one of the most famous Rishonim. We've spoken about him numerous times in these classes. His name was Rabbi Elazar of Worms, and he's the Roikeach. And basically, Rabbi Elazar of Worms, he authored a sefer called the Roikeach. He was very, very important. He lived in Worms, and he wrote many important svarim, and his influence on Yiddishkeit has been very significant in numerous ways. In recent years, more and more of his stuff have been revealed and have been published, including a little memoir he wrote about the killing of his wife. Let's read what he says over here. So it was in the year, this is printed in the book Zeres Ashkenaz and Sefard, page 164. In the year Taf Kuf Nun Zayin Leprat. That means it was the year 1197 according to my math. Chaf Beis Kislev. So it's coming up. I finished writing my commentary on Parshas Vayeshev, which is also coming up. I was sitting at home at my table. Bo aleinu shnayim misumanim. Two misumanim, people who have been, people wearing symbols, came. The assumption is that it's like during the time of the Crusaders, many of the Crusades would wear like a cross on their garments, that it probably means something like that. This is not during one of the Crusades. I don't believe 1197 was during any one of the Crusades. They took out their swords. Vehiku ishti hachasida, my pious wife, they struck her maras dolza. Ubiti balat, his daughter Balat, Hagdoila, the older one, Baku Roisha, okay, they split her skull. Ubiti Chana Baku Roisha, they killed her too, Vamesu. And then in the next paragraph, and I took this out, he goes on to describe their wounds in great detail and exactly how they're died, and it's really heart-wrenching to read this. Gamla Achar Shavua, about a week later, Tafsor Eitzech, they found the murderer. It's interesting, he says it in singular, because earlier he said there was two people, Varaguhu, and he was condemned to death. So, in other words, the non-Jewish authorities are the ones who found him and executed him. Vinisharti b'chaysar kol, I'm missing everything. I'm lacking. Uva'ini gadol, great pain. Uyusurim gedolim. Now he writes as follows: Koidem harikasa. I want to tell you, before she was killed. So now he starts singing her praises. Kansa klafim lichtay svarim. She would buy parchment in order to write books. As we know, not only Sifrei Torah today, only Sefer Torah, but then other manuscripts as well. Very often most often were written on parchment. Who bought the parchment? Dolza, his wife, bought the parchment. She supported me. My sons and daughter, from other people's money. What does it mean from other people's money? Other people's money presumably means that money lending. In other words, she would lend someone $100, and then she would get back, with interest, $500, and so that's how they lived. We know many Jews did that. But who was running the money lending show? Dolza was running the money lending show. She worked hard. So the idea of a Lakewood koilo, a guy's learning, or the wife working, you see the Rekeach had that. Okay. And woe to me that I lost them. How much blood was spilled? They died in front of my eyes. May Hashem show us the retribution, v'yarachem al nishmasan, have pity on their souls, v'yarachem al pleitan ish eres, and have pity on the Jewish people who remain, and on my children, because his daughters were killed, but his son survived. Now, after this, he also wrote a poem, a kina, for his wife, that's on the theme of Eishes Chayil. So it's a beautiful thing, and really you should look at the whole thing, but I just want to show you a few lines. So it begins like this: Eishes Chayil miyimtza, ki ishti hachasida maras dolza. So here he's praising his wife. He's saying, my wife, Dolza, was Eishes Chayil. Then look what he says here. Sidrei tefila b'boker over eres soideres. She would daven in the morning and night. Uleveis hakneses mikademes uma acheres. And to shul, she would go early and be there late. This is a woman who went to shul every day in the weekday. Okay, notice the rhyme. Soideres, mikademes, ma'acheres. But she went to shul every day, morning and night. Pia pascha b'chachma. She opened her mouth with wisdom. Right? The Isser Heter Yadash. She knew the halachas. Isser Heter. She's also she was an intelligent woman, and she was a learned woman. And then as Yom HaShabbos Yosheves, Drashas Bala Shemaas. On the day of Shabbos, she would hear her husband's speech. Her husband gave a drasha in shul. She came to shul to hear the speech. And then Tznuah Mikol V'Chachama. She's a Tznuah. In other words, there is no contradiction. For the Rekef, there's no contradiction between being modest, Tznuah, but at the same time, someone who went out every single day and went out every single Shabbos, and moreover, was running an entire business and a side gig of preparing Svarim. We also know from the Eishes Chayil she was making tzitzis, and he goes into this. This is a very industrious woman. She's getting a lot of things done. Obviously, out of the home, but it's not a contradiction. For a Yid in Ashkenaz living in the 1100s, it was possible to do this in a way that was a tznius dika. Okay, so I think we painted a little bit of a picture over here. These two different approaches to the Vateitzei Dina. We see it in the Pshat. We see it in the Pshat, whether you say something, whether you don't say something, and how you say something. Really, I showed you it's already rooted in the Midrashim, where you see these two voices in the Midrashim, and then you see it in the Halacha, in the halacha as well. So the last part,
See now also in Europe and culture. So
yeah, there's differences in different cultures today about how tznius is done. So let's actually look. That's a good transition to see the Sikha of the Rebbe on this subject. What's the Sikha? So the Sikha is like this. The whole time we ignored Rashi, really. Rashi, we're going to take a look at Rashi, what Rashi says, and let's read it, and let's analyze it, and let's see what the Rebbe said about this Rashi. Rashi addresses the question of why it says Bas Leah. Dina Bas Leah. Everyone has this question. Why does it say Bas Leah? Zok Rashi, Bas Leah, Veloy Bas Yaakov, not the daughter of Yaakov. Ella al Shem Yitziyasa Nikras Bas Leah, because she went out. That's why she's called Bas Leah, because Leah also went out. Afi Yasan Isaisa, she also went out. Shanamar Vatete Leah Likrasai Leah also went out. Now, on the one level, you could come and say, where did Rashi get this from? We know where he got it from. That's a Tanchuma. And we know the Tanchuma's approach. The Tanchuma is not happy with women going out, so that's one way to look at this Rashi. The Rashi is not happy with women going out as well. And that's it's a fair way to read this Rashi, and many of the Rashi's commentators have said that that's pretty much what Rashi means. Obviously, if you say that, then it is a little bit of an outlier from all the things that I've been saying this evening, because then here you would have a source within Ashkenaz bringing the idea that going out in and of itself without any other commentary was a problem, and if so, this is very unique because we don't find that in Ashkenaz. Okay, however, you really, and definitely this was the Rebbe's approach to Rashi, is you need to look at Rashi with a fresh eye. You cannot come to Rashi with the baggage from the Medrash. And you need to look at this Rashi and forget anything that you know about the Midrashim. And once you do that, and you look at the language here, do you find anything condemning here? No, you don't find. All you find is the theme of emulation. Emulating, like, Leah went out, you went out, that's all. There is no judgment that is here in this Rashi. And so therefore, the Rebbe's approach is, that's the only way you read this Rashi. There is no judgment, there is no condemnation, anything of the sort. In fact, to the contrary, you go back, and what did Rashi himself tell you about Leah going out? Rashi himself in Parashat Vayetze said, Leah going out was a very noble thing. She had a taiva to have more shvatim. That's a beautiful thing. So if we have any information, it's positive that Dina went out like Leah went out. Leah, we know, went out in a positive way. There is no language over here of anything else. And so, therefore, if anything, it leads us to say that Dina went out also in a positive way. So this is the Rebbe's approach to reading Rashi, that you kind of have to forget all the background of where it came from. Okay, so now one second. So why is it a good thing? So with Leah, we know why it was a good thing. She wanted more shvatim, so she went out. She had such a taiva to tell Yaakov, by the way, we're going to be together tonight. She had fun. With Dina, what's the mila? What was the advantage? So this is another Rashi, the Rebbe explains. The other Rashi is that Dina was supposed to be offered to Esav, which is a very, very bizarre thing. And Yaakov was punished for not allowing Dina to be married to Esav. What does that show you? That Dina had the power to influence. Obviously, there's only one way to understand that. If you're going to say that Dina should have been given to Esav, it means that Dina had the ability to bring Esav to tshuva. And the truth is that in the model of tzaddik and bali tshuva, Rachel is the avodah of a tzaddik, perfection, right? Torah describes her as perfect. Leah crying, that represents the avodah of the bal tshuva. The bal tshuva brings himself back into the fold. So that also represents the avodah of bringing other people back into the fold. In other words, we see that Leah had the power to bring people in. Dina had the power to bring Esav in. And that is why Vateitze Dina, the Rebbe learns. Vateitze Dina was a good thing. Lirois b'vnais haaretz was for what? To be mashpia on b'nais haaretz, to have an influence on the b'nais haaretz. We know that a Jew is supposed to have a positive influence in the surroundings. So the Rebbe says you could read that in Rashi just as well as you could read anything else. She went out to see and to influence. And just like by Leah was a positive, and Leah represents the avodah of the Baal Tshuva of bringing negative into positivity, Dina, we know, we were told, is supposed to do that with Esav, so here she's going ahead and she's doing it. And therefore, what's the Haira? The Haira is in number 26. Omekan Haira l'neshei Yisrael. Here is the relevant message for Jews today. Yes, there is that value. There is this concept of the home. There is that concept. The main task of a woman is to establish a Jewish home, which that is why they need to be home. It seems like the stress is here more on the family and home rather than modesty per se. At least that's my reading over here. Nonetheless, if you have the unique talents where you're able to influence on the outside, if women have that ability, they should use this quality, but in a modest way, to bring people to serve the Eibishter, and to influence other Jewish women who are outside, and to go out and to meet them there and to bring them lamutav. Though it's obvious, obviously this whole effort, this whole project has to be done in a tzniistic way, like the Rakech said about his wife. Even in outwardness, you need to see the value of modesty. Nonetheless, together with being really careful about tznius, this is the job that they need to do. So here you have the Rebbe's hashkafa, and the Rebbe sees that in the pasuk of Dina and in the Rashi of Dina. So I personally found this very interesting to kind of see these different perspectives in Medrash. Moreover, to see it in the pshat, but what people say, what people don't say, and then most importantly, how it reflects itself in the halacha. And so here we see, look, there is the tznius is a value is an important Jewish value. What exactly that means? Yes, there are some elements of tznius that are, so to speak, universal, right? Universal, all times, all places, whatever. There are elements of tznius that are not universal, and then at each time, in each place, it needs to be done in its way. And I don't think we shouldn't get too judgmental on the Sfardim shouldn't get too judgmental on us. We should all respect that there was different ways of doing this. We're all trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to live that value. What exactly it means to live that value meant different things. And that influences how you see a pasuk, how you touch a pasuk, and even, as we saw, it influences the halacha as well.